crazy kids. This is going to be a short video, part 3 of the transmission series, learning about your 62 TE transmission. This, in my hot little hands, is not a donut, a metal donut, or Godzilla's roller skate wheel. This is a torque converter. What does it do? How's it spelled? Blah, blah, blah. What it does, I shall show you over here through the benefit of illustration. It sits between your engine and your transmission, and is in this section called the bell housing, called so because it's bell-shaped, and the donut fits there. Flex plate bolts to it, and bolts to the engine on this side and the torque converter on that side, and the inside of the torque converter is splined such that it drives the input of the transmission. When this piece slips over, are you able to see the splines in there? Maybe you are. Okay. What does it do, the torque converter? Well, what it does is a couple of things. It performs the function of that the clutch performed in the days of yore when you were driving manual vehicles. It allows the vehicle to stop, but the engine to keep running, because in a manual transmission, they're locked together one-to-one. The torque converter slips and allows the engine to keep turning and the transmission to be stopped. Isn't that exciting? How does it work, you ask? I hear you ask. Well, there's a good illustration for it. I was probably 35 before I actually learned how these things work. So I knew what it did, but I didn't know exactly how does it work? How does one side slip and the other side doesn't? So picture that fan and that fan. Picture that that fan is in front of that fan. And as that fan blows, this fan would begin to spin, but you could grab this fan and stop the wheels and it would slip. The torque converter does the same thing, except the medium is transmission fluid and not air. Obviously, much more dense, so much more solid connection between the two. You could phrase it another way, is that the torque converter spins and bypasses fluid to bleed off that motion of the engine without the transmission. That's another way to say it. Inside here is a rotor and a stator. It looks like 2 turbines, and it's welded up from the factory when it's made. They're quite heavy. This is the engine side of it. Your flex plate or flywheel, depending on how you want to describe it, is bolted to those 4 points. And we'll put part number, and there it is. It is filled with fluid, which I have now spilled on the cart, along with maybe some coffee. But because of that's how it works. It has one other function that I should describe, in that it is also, the reason it's called a torque converter is because it also has a gearing effect. It acts as a torque multiplier, like a gear, or technically a lever. The torque converter, somewhere on it will be printed the ratio. It trades distance for force, so you would spin it more and it would turn less, but it would have more torque on the outside. This is why cars with automatics are in the 60s and 70s became faster than cars with manuals, because of the torque effect. Gave you a lower gear, more torque, better launch, wheelies, all that fun stuff. Okay, well, the torque converter, as far as you care about it in your Promaster, has only a few facets to consider. It's not incredibly expensive, $300 to $400. But it is quite expensive in the big picture to replace, because the transmission has to drop down, take the old converter off, new converter on. That part is easy, but getting the transmission down is quite a bit of labor. We charge 6 hours for that, and I'm thinking of upping that to 7 because it is a big job. All right, as you can see here, this is kind of a finagle. This just happens to be the way we do it. Shit. As you can see, the drops down on the fancy transmission jack, and then we twist it, because we're only here in this particular job to change the torque converter, flex plate, and transmission pump. Normally, what you do is pick it up higher and take the transmission all the way out. Obviously, the transmission is totally disconnected, but you can do it like this. Of extreme importance is the fact that the bottom of the transmission isn't really flat and doesn't mate to that jack, so we've ratchet strapped it onto the jack platter. And the jack platter is articulated with, you can adjust it, which is nice. And as you can see, with the axles out, it will lose its fluid and make a big mess, but I think I got most of it. Isn't that exciting? We'll be getting to this pump here any minute now. The other thing to know, so the torque converters, generally, we have had very good luck. In my Promaster ownership, with 4 vans, but 2.1 some odd million miles, I had one converter that needed replaced, and I actually don't know that it needed replaced. I replaced the pump and the converter at the same time because I was unsure which one was actually causing the problem. The problem, or the symptom more accurately, will be that you'll put the vehicle in gear and it won't go anywhere. It'll just spin because this is not making that connection to the transmission. It's not transmitting power for one reason or another. Now, there are many reasons it could not work. One would be if it was deprived of fluid, like if you had a leak or your pump wasn't working, whatever. But the torque converter also has one other facet, which is called the lockup clutch, which is inside it. Back in days of yore, the converter was always unlocked, and it was always doing that torque multiplication effect. They found that you can get a lot more mileage and almost like another gear out of the thing by having it lock up mechanically internally, which it does with a clutch and electric solenoid that sends pressure to that clutch and pushes it and fires it. You will notice when you accelerate in your van that it gets up to speed or whatever, and then a few seconds later, the RPM drops by 200 RPM, and now it's in cruise. That is your converter going into lockup. And as you would expect, it's programmed to stay unlocked for most of your slow speed travel, but once you get up over about 45, usually it locks. But it does unlock between gear changes to make them smoother. That slippage, that extra slippage of being unlocked makes the gear transition smoother, and that's a lot about transmission programming and whatever. But what we do see, when the converter goes bad, it will throw sort of a constellation of codes, and one code that it throws is for the torque converter control solenoid, TCC, the P073. I'll put it up on the screen. I think it's 738. I can't recall. It's possible that it is not your torque converter. It is that fluid control solenoid mounted directly to the solenoid pack that controls it. A very cheap part. So as a diagnostician, I might go in there if I suspected it was just that little solenoid and replace that because it's cheap and easy. But if not, it would be the converter, assuming you have good fluid pressure and many other things. Okay, what have we learned? Well, we've learned it's like a flying saucer that when it falls on your toe will kill you. We've learned what it does, how it comes, where it comes from, blah, blah, blah. To the best of my knowledge, there are no upgrades for the torque converter. I'm sure you could go find some race piece that would fit, but what would be the benefits? You just want it to work as it's intended and then last forever. I don't know if, dragsters will have fancy torque converters because they use that multiplication effect to get more gear and more torque and more launch, higher stall speed and all this fun stuff off the line. You're not interested in any of that crap because you're in a big cargo van. Why would you want to? Anyway, all the learnings, none of the sufferings, and no tuition. Promasters only, Barberton, Ohio. I'm Kip. We are expanding, and I am headed towards my heart attack any day now. So that's fun. Love you, and let's touch the tips when you come in. Carry on.